Welcome to the Less Anxious Podcast with life coach and anxiety management specialist, Kristen Watts. Please visit us at lessanxious.com. How would you like to feel less anxious?
Hi there, this is Kristen with the second episode of the Less Anxious Podcast. Welcome. So yesterday, when I did the first episode, I was talking about my history with anxiety and how I've had this is a very long-term issue with me from as far back as I can remember. And I know that it is for many people. I think that some people might not, it might have started at a sudden point with a, some type of crisis or tragedy or something that caused trauma. But however you got to the point where you're struggling with anxiety, I guess the main question is, what can you do about it? So that is kind of the main theme of the podcast. What can be done to be helpful so that things don't hurt as bad and so that you can function with anxiety better and maybe possibly manage it better. Because over the long run of your life, what matters overall is the quality of your life. It's not as though you can guarantee yourself that you're not going to have circumstances in your life that provoke anxiety. I really wish that there was a way to manage that. That would be great, but that might possibly not be the case. So I just live my life assuming that circumstances will occur that will provoke anxiety in me, and I need to come up with as many strategies as I can to be able to manage it, minimize it, so that I can function as well as possible with anxiety. So one thing so continuing sort of with my history, where we left off last time was, I went through my childhood and adulthood and the different things that I struggled with. And I suggested a couple of things that were helpful, that I've discovered eventually that were a little bit helpful along the way in managing anxiety. But I wanted to, this last part has come to me in just the last couple of years. I did not realize that, so when you're not quite aware of what's going on in your mind and body, and all you know is that you become exhausted and have to lay down or whatever, you can't always put together why certain things are occurring the way they do. I could not figure out why, if I had a circumstance or something that provoked anxiety, why it would completely shut me down the way it does mentally. But I have come up with something that I really am exploring right now that I think may be the case for a lot of people. And it may be a case for a lot of people who aren't necessarily aware of this piece yet. So I'm going to go through it and mention it. Just in case somebody out there is struggling with the same type of thing or something similar. Okay. So what I have figured out on my own, because I haven't been taking any type of prescription medicine or anything to manage my stuff in the last several years. And I have been in therapy somewhat, but it hasn't helped me to the extent that I was really wanting. So, however it was that I figured out what I figured out, I'll just tell you about it, just in case it's helpful to somebody. So, in a crisis situation, like in an emergency, I guess just the adrenaline rush, suddenly I can do whatever needs to be done, within the framework of my abilities and knowledge I have to this point in my life. I can do what I need to do. So when I had emergencies when my daughter was young, even though I was not doing well at the time, I would have an emergency like she had what they call it, reactive airway, which is, they didn't want to name it asthma, but it's basically asthma. She would wake up in the middle of the night with seal bark coughing. And I can remember one time in particular that she just very rapidly was, her lips were getting blue and stuff, and she just wasn't able to breathe. And it was in the winter in Iowa. I had to get her in this, clothing appropriate to go out in the middle of the night, in the middle of the winter in Iowa to get to the emergency room. But I knew what to do. And I, had, I guess, enough adrenaline that I could function well enough to get that accomplished, which is good. I'm very grateful for that, but I couldn't count on that the rest of the time. So a lot of the time when I was, I was just trying to live life to the best of my ability, it was like, it was a lot like treading water. I just couldn't get things accomplished the way I saw other people doing things. Couldn't figure out why. It didn't make any sense to me that I would, just not be able to do stuff like that very well. Like, no matter what it was, just normal life things, a lot of times were very difficult for me. And then about 2 years ago, for whatever reason, I suddenly realized that what it was when I have anxiety, the more anxious I get, which I was anxious all the, most of the time. So I never really had a chance to figure out that was the root of the problem, because I didn't ever see myself without anxiety. So I'd be able to evaluate myself without anxiety. So when I would have, the more severe my anxiety would get, the more problems I would have with executive function. And one of the main problems that I would have with executive function was my ability to sequence things. So anything like a calendar, or keeping track of time, or making a plan, or making a checklist, or making a grocery list, or anything, like how many in my life, I already know. I can already predict ahead of time that no matter how hard I try, if I write a series of groceries down on a list, I will get to the grocery store without the list. And I know that everybody does stuff like this sometimes, but not everybody does things only like this all the time. And it's a small miracle when you actually get to the store with the list. I pretty much lack the ability to go down a checklist. Don't think I've ever successfully in my life checked off a series of things in a checklist if there were more than 3 things on the list. That's about as far as I can go. I can't go down and check, like for a grocery list, for instance. I invariably get home and realize that there was something that was on the list that I completely missed, or I saw it and I thought I had it. My brain does stuff like that all the time. So, I guess I'll tell a really stupid story about how I figured this out. I was watching a friend of mine's children while she was out of town. And the kids, there are 2 kids that were a little bit older, not teens yet, but older kids. So they could all kind of, they could play somewhere in the house or do whatever they were doing. And they didn't need me right there supervising. It's not like toddlers. So one of the things that I was going to make was that my friend had purchased the groceries to make ratatouille. So it required me to slice up 2 small eggplants, 2 yellow squash, 2 zucchini. I can't remember what else. But then there was another pile of vegetables that I needed to chop and saute to put in the bottom of the pan before you put the sliced vegetables in. So common sense would dictate that you need to chop the chopped vegetables and put them in the saute pan and be sauteing them while you slice the other vegetables. But my brain was being very obsessive because it was telling me things like, you know that you can't slice vegetables evenly. You know that they will be all crooked and this will look stupid. And then you're going to be so irritated, you're not even going to be able to enjoy it. So all this effort is for nothing. You might as well feed the children Pop-Tarts. And while all that was going on in my brain, I was so busy obsessing about the sliced vegetables that every time I went over to chop the vegetables that needed to be chopped first to be put in the pan, I would end up at the pile of sliced vegetables. And I'd be like, no, I need to go chop those. That, like I finally had to take the slicing vegetables and put them somewhere out of sight so that I wouldn't be obsessing about them when I really needed to just, chop up the other things. I eventually got it done. It was a recipe I'd never made before, so that was part of my issue. But I actually wanted to make it. I was excited about it. She said the kids liked it. So by the time I got it done, I was, how you get frustrated sometimes, but the point of frustration that you get to, you're kind of tired and a little delirious and kind of like laughing to yourself so that you don't cry. But it took me, I don't know, like at least 3 times longer than it should have. And I kept on doing the thing that I could not direct my brain to the thing that I needed to direct my brain to first. So it was super frustrating. As many of these types of things are to me. Now I know that that's a slightly more complex thing, and you could be saying to yourself, a lot of people can't make a new recipe that is a multi-step recipe without getting frustrated and screwing it up. But the reason that this particular incident made me realize that sequencing was a big part of my problem was that there was such a specific sequence of things that I needed to do. I needed to do these things in a certain order, and my mind was just skipping back and forth, and I couldn't put things in a certain order. And the only reason that I was like anxious, having any type of anxiety, was because I was doing a new recipe, and I just kind of get like a little bit discombobulated when I travel. So I was at somebody else's house using somebody else's kitchen, which wouldn't be as difficult if you're making like spaghetti and ragu. But so I'm making a new recipe, and it had a certain order. It made complete sense to do things in a certain order. And I couldn't do it in a straight line like that. Like there was no linear order for me. I just couldn't accomplish that. Too complicated. So I started thinking back, oh, by the way, I actually eventually did get it put together. It took me 3 times longer, and it looked beautiful, and everything was evenly sliced. And I know that that's important to some people because it's important to me. But moving on, I got started thinking back through my life and to this article that I wrote in 2004. And I realized that one of the reasons that I would get so exhausted is because I couldn't think clearly enough and do things in a way that made sense enough in a linear way. So I was busy trying to concentrate and focus and get the things accomplished, but my brain was so busy spiraling out of control for no real reason that was apparent to me that I would end up exhausted because it took so much more effort to accomplish something. So one example that I can give of it taking so much more effort to accomplish something than it should ever is that, like, I remember a time in my life, and I don't know what was going on that was causing me to be not very super functional at this time, but I went through a period of like a couple of weeks, maybe more, where every day when I got out of the shower, I realized that I hadn't rinsed the shampoo out of my hair. Now, talk about being frustrated to tears, because when you have more than one thing that is super simple and should be automatic, that actually takes you time and effort to redo, when you have multiple things like that a day, you get frustrated and you feel hopeless. Like, it starts to feel like a heavy burden, and it starts to feel hopeless, and you start to suspect that maybe you're an idiot. And I already know that okay, so my intelligence, like if I take an IQ test, is average, just, on the top end of average. Not a genius, but that's really good because a lot of geniuses have their own sets of problems. So I'm fine with not being a super genius, like Wile E. Coyote. And I'm glad that I don't have some type of intellectual deficit. That might actually be a self-esteem blow, and that might be the worst thing about it. But when you're about sort of average smart, and you try to do things that anybody can do, even if they aren't really all that together. So you try to do things like take a shower and get out and have the soap rinsed out of your hair. And you can't do it day after day. It will drive a person insane, especially if you're struggling with chronic fatigue anyway. And it just makes you exhausted, and you feel really, really, really exhausted and tired. Bad. At least that's the effect that it had on me. Okay. I've often heard people talk about the automatic things, the routines that we learn that are supposed to be automatic, like brushing your teeth or pouring a glass of water. These are things that people don't really have to think about because they've done them a lot of times, and they have confidence in their competency. Because even if they had never poured a glass of water before, it isn't a super multi-step plan. And, you can use like maybe both hands to pour it. It's something that's accomplishable. But if you have trouble focusing to the point and doing things in order, it's difficult to get the cup in the right place to pour the water without doing something different or getting distracted or like whatever. And if you're going to brush your teeth and you have this problem where your brain is just here, there, and everywhere, and it's going in loops, it's very difficult to get that all accomplished. You have your toothbrush, and then you're like, hey, look, a squirrel, and you wander off, and then you realize you still have your, you can't get the parts together. It takes longer. Everything gets very frustrating. Believe me, I have a fairly well-developed frustration tolerance level, probably because of having to deal with this my entire life so far. And I haven't ever ended up, going crazy completely. So, that speaks to my frustration tolerance level. But what I have found out is that the more frustrated I get with myself, the more discouraged I get, and the worse my executive function gets. So anyway, I wanted to bring all of that up because I think that, at some point in my life, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I was put on medication for it. And I tried more than one medication, which made my anxiety worse because those medications are mostly stimulants, and it just made my anxiety worse. Stimulants don't really work very well for me because of that. So I didn't like the way the medications made me more anxious. And it also interfered with my sleep like everything else. So I just ended up not going that route with medication. But anyway, so when I was thinking back over my life, saying, could that be the problem? It is really my ability to sequence things and then go through the things that I just sequenced in a certain sequence, do things in a certain order. So when I look back at the article that I wrote in 2004, it's called Brain Fog versus the Quest for Coffee. And it was all about how I was just really trying to make a pot of coffee so that I could drink the coffee and maybe feel better. But I just kept on thinking of other things and wandering around and doing other things. And I never did get the cup of coffee made. And I just ended up exhausted from my day of just stopping and starting, forgetting important things, and then suddenly realizing that I have to pay a bill, and then going to go pay the bill, but realizing that I forgot my purse. So going back to get my purse, and then going back to pay the bill. My days used to be like that a lot, all the time. And I was on disability for quite a while because I literally couldn't function as an adult and get things accomplished that were pretty simple, seemingly simple things. So I wanted to go through all of that, even though they're not the most fun memories that I have, because I feel like maybe a lot of people are struggling with something similar to this. I feel like maybe a lot of people think that maybe they have ADHD, and maybe they do, but maybe this is part of it. Maybe anxiety problems cause ADHD, cause this specific problem with sequencing that I have that makes it next to impossible to accomplish simple tasks efficiently. Like eventually I'll get them accomplished, but nobody has all afternoon to pay their electric bill. You don't need to make 4 trips to pay your electric bill. It's a fairly straightforward process. You just get the things together that would be needed to pay the bill, and then go to the place where you pay the bill, and then pay the bill, and then take everything else that you brought with you that wasn't necessary to pay the bill and take it home with you. And then you're done with that until the next time the bill is due. But if you have to stop and start the process half a dozen times, and you have to do that with everything that you go to do that seems like it should be simple, your life just gets exhausting and overwhelming, and you wonder what in the actual hell is wrong with you. And it ends up causing a lot of emotional pain that you would not really associate with that, I don't think. I mean, I felt like such a failure all of the time. I felt a lot of shame and guilt for not being able to manage my household and not being able to, just get a job. Because it was always kind of the thing in my life that people would say, or people would imply that I wasn't really trying very hard. I was just not, I needed to work harder. I really needed to get my act together and do better, do more things. And I was always looking around at everybody else and thinking to myself, wow, everybody else, like I'm being told that everybody else feels this crappy. But they just look at how a lot of people actually look happy and they're going about their life and they don't seem confused. And wow, they're faking it so much better than me. That's amazing. So, I just felt a lot of shame and guilt and, emotional pain, and like I was letting everybody down because I think that the root of this, a lot of the problems, maybe not 100% of the problems, but one of the foundational problems that underlie the rest of the problems was my anxiety, which was caused by my inferiority complex. And it makes it so that you can't do what you need to do, and then you feel all kinds of horrifying emotions. And nobody, you know, very rarely in life do people ever say, I want to be a vat of unresolved emotional pain forever. But that's sort of what it feels like when you're smart enough to know what you need to be able to do, but you just absolutely can't do it. And it's like treading water every day is very discouraging and frustrating. So if you're in a similar situation, have some empathy and sympathy for yourself and treat yourself kindly, because as much as you think that it should be simple to fix, sometimes it's not simple to fix. Oh, well, what are you going to do? Be mad at yourself and hate yourself until it's better? I can tell you that does not work. You have to be kind to yourself. Treat yourself like somebody you love, somebody you care about, somebody you have compassion and empathy for. That is what will actually end up allowing you enough peace of mind to dig yourself out of this hole. And hopefully, I hope that you cannot relate to anything that I said today. Anything. Because I hope that you are having such a much more joyful, unfrustrating life. But if you can relate to anything that I said today, hey, it may be worth exploring whether or not anxiety is playing a role in your other dysfunctional things in your life. So I'm going to sign off for now. Thank you very much for listening to my TED Talk, and I will see you next time. Please treat yourself like someone you love. Bye for now.
You've been listening to the Less Anxious podcast with life coach and anxiety management specialist, Kristen Watts. Please visit us at lessanxious.com. How would you like to feel less anxious?